Welcome to In the Space. I'm your host, Martin Sweeney, and I will be talking with friends, artists, activists, neighbors, and leaders about disability and community. In the Space is a virtual conversation acknowledging and celebrating disability culture and identity in all its history, diversity, and creative self-expression. Our thanks to Pasadena Media for making this broadcast possible. Welcome to another episode of In the Space. Today, our guest is Clovis Blackwell. Clovis is an interdisciplinary artist with expertise in screen printing. His work explores themes of suffering, perseverance, and transformation, and is regularly exhibited in Southern California and internationally, including group shows at the Kennedy Center Terrace Gallery in Washington, D.C., and the World Financial Center Gallery in New York City. Clovis received his BFA from San Francisco Art Institute, an MFA from Azusa Pacific University, and has taught printmaking for many years. He owns and operates Fleur de Boom Editions, a publisher of limited edition fine art serigraph prints. Clovis's work draws upon layered imagery that often leads to ink blot-like abstractions, where the viewer may connect to their own unconscious, to see different objects or figures within the work. This progression mirrors the artist's personal journey of transformation, an attempt to shake off the assumptions that impede personal growth. Welcome, Clovis.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're very excited. I'm interested in what informs an artist, and your work centers on many things, including transformation, which I think there's a real connection there in terms of disability. But before we get into an introductory video, why don't you tell me a little bit about your connection with Pasadena?
Oh, yeah. When we first moved down to Pasadena, my wife and I, or moved down to LA, kind of noticed and really thought about Pasadena right away. It reminds me so much of my hometown of San Luis Obispo. It's got its own identity in this big, massive urban sprawl, and just reminded me so much of home. It was very close to Azusa Pacific University, where I was planning to attend grad school, so it was perfect.
And so how long have you lived in Pasadena?
Oh, since 2006 now.
Oh, wow. Great. Okay, great. Well, let's take a look at that video. This is Muse and the Pain.
My name is Clovis Blackwell. I'm an artist. I taught at Cesar Chavez Academy in East Palo Alto. The second year I taught, we lost about 30% of our staff after school started in just the first few months. Stress, causing 20-year-old Teach for America students to get ulcers and have to drop out. And I think by the end of that second year, my body kind of started to have some reactions, and that led to me developing rheumatoid arthritis. The rheumatoid arthritis really just, ground everything to a halt. The body of work I developed was called Vincible. Vincible means capable of being overcome. So it was about sort of coming to an acceptance of the suffering that I experienced and learning to see sort of a positive change that had in my life. It certainly gave me a new perspective about my own mortality. So it was kind of about coming to terms with this body. I've always had this kind of, goofy, quirky, even silly personality, and none of that was coming through in the artwork. And so instead of working on Vincible, I decided to make work that was about being invincible. So I created Super Clovis, and I began to explore this idea of being, all powerful, and really try to parody the idea of a Superman. It was around that time when the MFA program at Azusa Pacific finally got approval from the school and it got accepted into the program. That was a great opportunity for me to really explore Super Clovis. I had developed an online interactive city where I could, develop a backstory for Super Clovis and the world he lived in, and invite other friends to create their own superhero. One of the other characters in the forum decided that Super Clovis had died, so he created this really elaborate post that was a news article about the death of Super Clovis, and no one knew what happened. And so I just rolled with that. Through that experience, I used that to develop this anti-Clovis persona. So now I had a good and an evil, or a yin and a yang, or a shadow and persona, if we want to talk in Jungian terms. I had these two characters, the Super Clovis and the anti-Clovis. I was doing some photography and some screen printing at the time. It was all anti-Clovis work. One of the images that got me interested in working with Super Clovis to begin with was from the Death of Superman comic. There's an image of Lois Lane holding the dead Superman. It's a pietà. It's the same image of Virgin Mary holding Christ after he's been lowered from the cross. That sort of connection between historical art and kind of comic book art was really powerful to me. It was that moment of weakness in the superhero. So I want to bring that back into my work, looking at my weakness. I started to have this vision of them battling. The conflict between Super Clovis and anti-Clovis became really compelling. I was starting to read more of Jung's work, how the psyche processes things, and I was starting to read some work by Joseph Campbell about the hero. That led to me really wanting to see these action figures in this big crazy battle. I made 4 large landscapes that they battled on. I was thinking, again in kind of Jungian terms of, how the shadow and the persona kind of are in conflict, and how, through what he called the process of individuation, it's kind of uniting these forces within oneself and coming to kind of a unity. I really kind of got interested in just, something more iconic, this image of the mushroom cloud. Awesome, powerful, beauty. The reason that I think it's appealing to me is back to that idea of new life. There's death and then new life, death and resurrection. There's that bit of hope in there. There's a chance for a new start. These are all the things that I think are what compelling to me, because of, the arthritis, this moment of suffering. If you want to take it to Joseph Campbell's writing, he talks about the road of trials that the hero goes through in order to be transformed. So I've been thinking of these mushroom clouds as that road of trials. The progression of the disease is halted right now. I've had some permanent damage, but not anything, that is a huge hindrance. I still get by, and flare-ups are under control. Life is, much better than it was. I can handle a good amount of stress right now without my body, kind of crapping out on me. So that's a blessing.
Oh, wow. When I first saw that video, so many questions, so many ideas. And for many people who are not familiar with rheumatoid arthritis, and again, not to dwell on the pathology, but when you and I first were talking, you had mentioned RA as a disease, which stopped me a little bit. But of course, it is a disease. And if you look at it on a continuum, you got disease, then disability, and then stigma. And how do you break all these things down? Maybe it's something that we can touch on a little bit today. But how are you? And for our viewers, what did having rheumatoid arthritis mean for you as an artist?
Mhm. Yeah. I thankfully, that video was taken some time ago, and there really hasn't been any further progression. I haven't had any additional joint damage, thankfully. So I'm, I'm left with some with lingering with permanent damage from my earlier flare ups, but at least my body's not attacking itself anymore.
Well,
Um,
my experience has been that when sort of you encounter or an individual encounters disability, it sort of is a fork in the road and it takes
yeah.
you in a direction that you might not have ever anticipated.
Mhm.
In your video, you bring up all these themes of transformation, of persona and shadow, of good over evil, of vincible, invincible. I assume that it was the RA that took you down that path. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It came on when I was just a couple years out of my undergraduate program, where I was supposed to have my whole life ahead of me and lots of possibilities, and it basically, yeah, ground my life to a halt for a few years. And I went through a period of about 5 years where I was dealing with that rheumatoid arthritis, and then some death, some loss in my family, also my father and my grandfather. And so it was a very challenging 5 years that definitely took me to uh, what I certainly hope is the low point in my life. And then it was a time of like coming to terms with that, peace with that, and then finding my way through that, out of that. That trend. Not, it's tricky because that's been internalized in who I am, and so that comes out in my art, of course. So the hero myths are still very important to me today, as they were back in that work. And the hero anti-hero. If we identify with the hero, we probably also in some ways identify with the anti-hero, as both the shadow, what we want to be, and then what's sort of buried deep inside of us. And I think it's important to come to terms with that and allow ourselves to be both.
And in that work, did you find that it was a healing process?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Very interesting. All right, well, let's take a look at some of your work. And we go through it. You can tell us a little bit about it. This is work that came after that period, I take it. And you have some pretty strong imagery that I think also goes to the yin yang and the birth and death, etc. So here we have, an image that clearly shows us the nuclear mushroom cloud. Why don't you tell us how you got into this and what we're looking at?
Mhm. Yeah, well, the throughout that video, you're watching me with when I'm talking. I've got these colored pencil drawings of these mushroom clouds behind me, where I was really just exploring the image, and I was working these floral colors, these very colorful versions of the mushroom cloud, and I was like, I'm gonna start layering these with the flowers. It's this sort of image of ultimate destruction, but then pairing that with an image of fragility, something pretty, something actually that sometimes needs to die in order to propagate. A lot of flowers have to die, and that's how their seeds drop, and then there's new growth from that.
So here's an example, I guess, of where you're beginning to layer these images. Tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe also just the physical process of doing screen printing and layering that.
Right. Yeah. So screen printing is a stenciling process where I put down one layer of color at a time. I'm typically working in three colors, and here there's three colors. There's the mushroom cloud. There's a color layer for the flowers, and then there's a line layer that was put over the top of those flowers.
Now on the screen now, we're taking a look at three images, very different than what we were just looking at.
Mhm.
And as I was taking a deep dive into Clovis Blackwell, I realized that the layers began to change the experience of trying to understand what was happening. And I think that was part of your idea, is to sort of move this into sort of a deeper abstract level.
Yeah. And these pieces are all dissolutions. They've been dissolution, something that's coming undone. And I'll talk more about that maybe in a bit. But there's many layers in those pieces where the image starts to get buried and lost and dissolve into some more atmospheric thing.
And now we're beginning to get this kind of mandala kind of look.
Yeah, I've been really interested in circles lately. I mentioned cycles a moment ago. And so now I'm playing around with a circle image, looking around for images that I can use, creating circles out of those images, rotating them and reflecting them, in order to to create these mandalas, to create a meditative space for my viewer to sit and look at and contemplate.
What we're looking at here, I guess, are either triptychs or three separate pieces, but I'll go through 3 slides that kind of, I hope the viewer can see the subtle, but each change makes it a different work. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's happening here?
They started out with actually 9 different images, 3 flowers, 3 mushroom. No, is that right? Did I have more than that? I just kept layering and layering and layering, and thinking of again this progression of these more defined images breaking down and dissolving into something else.
What do we got here?
Yeah, so we've got we actually have 2 smaller images and one really big one. That one on the right is about 3 by 4 feet, so it's pretty big, and the ones on the left are maybe 8 by 10 inches. And that one on the left is emanation cut back. I was looking at grapevines actually. So that image is of a grapevine. I did a line drawing for that, a pruned back grapevine, and actually I think maybe one of the other layers is a photograph of a similar grapevine, but that's and it's like during just prior to harvest, where the leaves are full, there's grapes on it. So again, just this idea of grapevines need to be pruned back in order to grow, right? That pruning is part of their transformation that makes them healthy. And I kind of apply that to my experience with that rheumatoid arthritis, and how I in a lot of ways I needed to go through that in order to mature as a person.
Did you feel that as you were doing the work?
Yeah, the work I made helped me to accept that weakness in myself, in terms of having a body that's not invincible, right? Being able to accept my disability, I suppose, and come to terms with that, and then be able to grow and recognize that didn't need to define me or put my life on hold. I was still a vibrant person as well.
Okay, here we have layers upon layers. What is this?
Yeah, so this is a very new work. This came out of work from earlier this year for a show with Shoebox Projects, and it was a postcard show. So I made 18 different editions of postcards, and they're up for sale on their website still, I think. And for $10, you can get a postcard mailed to you or buy a set. But those were specifically the emanations, where it's only 3 layers, but I'm still working on a big stack of them right here and this is maybe a quarter of additional postcards that I'm going to be, that I'm still developing. I just keep printing and printing until they feel done. So I one of the things I love about printmaking is it's a democratic process. It's really meant to be made accessible to lots of people. So for this work, especially during a pandemic when we were all holed up inside, I wanted to make something that could easily be shared and shared through the postal service, that, a great democratic institution where we can connect with one another. So very much about getting my work out there to people, and being able to connect with them when we were all, kind of homebodies.
So you did a lot of work during the COVID.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Put
great.
together two shows during the pandemic.
Oh, well, that's terrific. What shows were those?
So there was that show, the postcard show with Shoebox Projects, and then at the very beginning, I was putting together a show with the Museum of Art History in Lancaster.
Uh-huh. Tell me a little bit about this idea of emanations and dissolutions. What's the play on that?
Yeah, so these are terms that I got from Joseph Campbell, and he was originally, when I was reading about the hero myths, but then he shifted to these apocalyptic myths and these creation myths, and so emanation is something coming into being, right? It's sort of being spoken or breathed into existence. You're thinking light going out, sort of the Big Bang maybe. And the dissolutions are that retraction. It's things coming undone. It's the breath sort of dissolving out. But there's this idea of breath there, this cyclical process of it's going out and then it's coming back. So that's I think really important to my work. Again, the cycles of death and life, rebirth. But again, that cycle that is natural, it's normal, and not something to be afraid of.
What do we have here?
Yeah, this is emanation K2 TOG YO slip 1, which is it's like knitting code. My wife is a knitter, so this is a ball of yarn, and then a flower from my garden, and then that mushroom cloud. And it's K2 is knit 2, TOG is together, so it's like knitting 2 together, and then yarn, I forget the YO is slip 1, but there's this I'm just thinking of things being bound together and coming undone and loosened and tightened again, in this sort of wonderful process.
Now, this is a little different, where you've all of a sudden moved it to a more simplified format. So tell me about that.
Yeah, these are meditations, meditation on a clean slate. That one in the middle, the black one, actually was a demo when I was teaching, and trying to demonstrate a specific process using a resist material. So painting directly onto a screen with a brush, and then how that creates a stencil. So I loved the result of it. It was very direct, and so simple. And so I came back to it, and I wanted to play around with, instead of using the black, which I don't use anymore, to use transparent colors, and then transparent and then pearlescent right on top, and trying different papers and so forth. And very much this meditating on this awful destructive force, or this powerful thing that it could be the end, but trying to see that as beautiful at the same time, in its, I suppose, its potential. Right, the apocalyptic myths are not about the end of things; they're really about the beginning of things. Because in the mythologies, there's always something that comes after those apocalyptic events. It really becomes an opportunity for starting fresh and for new growth.
Right. This last slide that we're going to look at just jumped out at me because of the past year that we've been through. So tell us.
Yeah, I mean, is it white guilt? I don't know.
Describe it for the viewer.
Sure. Yeah. So this is a dissolution. Black Lives Matter. I made a emanation. Dire distress was actually the kind of structured print that I first made that I created as a print to raise money for the Black Lives Matter organization. I've never in my life been much of an activist, but I think so many white people this year have realized that we don't have that luxury. We can't have that luxury. It's not just.
I think art is a language that you don't have with words, but can express so much that words can't express. And I think all of us went through heavy duty trauma in this past year. It doesn't matter what side of the street you're on. Just a horrible year. And as an artist, to be able to reflect that, I think is a great thing. So
yeah.
Any thoughts about how that experience impacted your identity in such a way that you probably will always hold on to that experience?
Yeah. I mean, it is very core to my identity in a lot of ways, that experience of suffering. It was a period of really intense suffering for me, physical and emotional. That coming at a pretty young age, at a time when the term arthritis made me sort of laugh at first, and think my doctor was crazy. Like, how I'm like 23, how can I have arthritis? What is this? This is nonsense. And trying to understand that when it's supposed to be the kind of the prime of my life, and having fun and launching my career, to see it all stop, literally stop. I had a couple years there where I really could not work at all, and that had a profound impact on my perception of myself. And growing through that, coming to accept it, and then find a way forward, I mean, it's basically given me something to talk about for 20 years since, right?
Uh-huh.
I mean, this really has defined who I am and what is important to me. And
I'm also interested in knowing or sharing with our viewers where they can find your work, and if you've got anything coming up in terms of as a show.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I had 2 solo shows during the pandemic, and so have been quite busy. I'm still working on. I showed you this stack of prints and more. So still just making those and getting those out there. I don't have any shows lined up at the moment. But I'm kind of taking a period of rest.
Oh, that's good. But if somebody wanted to see more of your work, go to the website.
You can go to clovisblackwell.com. Although probably Instagram at Clovis_Blackwell would be maybe the best place. You can see that show, that the postcard show, at Shoebox Projects, shoeboxprojects.com, I believe is their address. So that show is still up online. It's an online show.
And you're in Pasadena, so everybody that's out there, we all know Clovis Blackwell now. Clovis, thank you for spending the afternoon with us and sharing your work.
Thank you, Martin. Yeah, it was
I hope
great.
to see more of it.
Of course. Yeah. Soon. Very soon.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.